turn to Matthew chapter 5. We start a new mini-series. We're still in the Core52, but the new mini-series is based upon the Sermon on the Mount. So that's where we're going to start today. The good news is, for those of you who are doing the Core52 books, for the next few weeks, you're right in order. Chapter 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, I think. And so you won't get confused as much. Okay, although I'm going to apologize to Connie right now. As I was looking at it, I was thinking, well, my mind has changed since I put this together, and I don't like the titles. So you might get a title that just so you know. And it's not Connie's fault, it's, well. So today, we're going to talk about being blessed. And we're going to use the Sermon on the Mount as the text. And have you ever noticed that when we talk the Beatitudes, boy, that's some crazy stuff in there. I mean, it's just, there's some crazy stuff in there. We think we know what being blessed means. As a matter of fact, we use the word, I'm so blessed, so often. And I don't know if we really, truly know what it means. A lot of times it's just, it's Valentine's Day and I need to say something out loud that says, my girlfriend is pretty cool to have around, and so I'm blessed, right? But what about the other 364 days of the year, right? Yeah? Are you still blessed? The other day, when she threw a frying pan at you, were you blessed that day? And how many had a frying pan? Okay, just check. So I was thinking just a few minutes ago, this idea that what Jesus taught was so revolutionary, really is just in the technology around us. Just examples. I got this in 2005 on our way out to Montana. That's a pretty small camcorder. How many of you remember the big camcorders? Remember the stuff that you got a hernia putting it on your shoulder? Remember? You know, and those were small compared to what cameras had been like. This one has a 4 gigabyte hard drive. Yeah, let's see if I can open it up. Maybe not. It's got a 4 gigabyte hard drive. It's big. It's for this thing. It's big. It's 4 gigabytes. Is that pretty small? Yeah. It takes some nice pictures. Takes some nice videos. This is its replacement.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that's its replacement. So notice the difference between the two. And this whole part slides up, and there's a big rectangular, looks like a battery almost. And that's what all the video goes on. This one can do more, but this is 32 gigabytes.
Wow.
32, and you can do, I think this will take 128 gigs. So that's a lot of video. I don't know if I like you guys that much that I'm going to record that much. Just saying. It's that sort of, I love your wow. I just love that. It's that sort of, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew, the crowd who had followed Jesus around, and they're all sitting on this mountainside, in this little valley. They're listening to him. At the end of the sermon, they said, "Wow! Wow! What a message!" It's really the beginning of his ministry, and it changed everything. So what he has to say. We're 2,000 years after the fact, so we've gotten kind of callous to it. But I want you to know that what he said that day was, wow. And it changed people's lives. It should still change your life, but that's if you approach it with the idea, I'm going to be wowed today. So our core passage this morning is Matthew chapter 5, verses 11 and 12, which is really the end of the Beatitudes. But let's go over that. This is what you're supposed to be memorizing. Hopefully you've been doing a really good job of memorizing all these passages. And to tell you, I identify with you. I know what it's like. Not that many years ago, 20-some, 25 years ago, I memorized this passage. I had to, for the life of Christ, memorize the Sermon on the Mount. So it's Matthew chapter 5, Matthew chapter 6, Matthew chapter 7. So if you're struggling with a couple of verses, just remember that at the end of the semester, there's a test, and you have to demonstrate that you've, that's what we had to do. That was our final test, was to fill in the blank on the Sermon on the Mount. And it was fill in the blank, and there was no matching. There was no database down at the bottom that said, oh yeah, that sounds like that's about right. It was, you fill in the blank. Matthew chapter 5, verses 11 and 12. Blessed are you when people insult you. What? How many people in here love being insulted? I mean, we went last night and we saw Henry Cho last night. And he's been around for a long time. I love him. He's a Tennessee boy. You couldn't tell. He's Korean. He's 100% Korean. Grew up in Knoxville. Comes out dressed like me with jeans and Western boots. And he talks like this. You know? He's a country boy. And so you're just not prepared for it. And he's funny as all get out. But what amazed me last night was his repartee with the crowd. He would ask questions, they would respond, and he'd come back like that. He was also pretty good on the insults. So one guy gets up and he's making fun of him the whole time he's gone because he's faked it. He's faked it. He's had a phone call, and his wife was the one who dropped the dime on him. And so the wife is saying he was faking it. He really had to go to the bathroom. So he comes back and Cho says to him, says, yeah, you didn't have a phone call. You just have a small bladder. And just get over it. So do you love being insulted? If I'm in a comedy show, and I know it's comedy, yes, but if somebody's insulting me, I can't say I'm happy with that. Are you? And blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Wow, that doesn't seem to go with our current culture, does it? Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. That's our memory verse passage. Boy, is that just fundamentally upside down. It's just crazy, isn't it? But this section, this whole series, the Sermon on the Mount, is what I'm calling an ALTtitude. That's A-L-T, capital A-L-T, T-I-T-U-D-E, which is attitude and altitude mixed together. It is an attitude, the attitudes. What Jesus teaches is an attitude readjustment, but it's lofty. It's got altitude to it. And if you think about, as we go through these verses, if you think about what Jesus has to say here, these are some pretty phenomenal concepts. I mean, it's revolutionary. It's crazy. So here's the sermon. Matthew, and think about this. It is the sermon. You can't hardly talk to a human being on the planet and talk about, just mention the Sermon on the Mount. And there's not too many people nowadays, even today, that won't know what it, at least some idea of what it is. This is, Jonathan Edwards preached a sermon, A Sinner in the Hands of an Angry God, 250 years ago. Preached a great sermon. People still talk about it, but it's mostly just preachers talking about it. Most of you, I would say, don't know about Jonathan Edwards, much less that Jonathan Edwards preached this great sermons in, 250 years ago. But Jesus preached this sermon 2,000 years ago, and people still talk about it. So, verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, that is crazy, isn't it? If you've ever been at your life, if you've ever been feeling poor in spirit, did you feel like heaven was going to be your reward? I mean, if you're feeling poor in spirit, don't you feel, you feel lower than a snake's belly? And to me, that's what poor in spirit is. And you're not feeling, you just don't feel like there's too much coming your way. But what Jesus is saying is, that attitude, that sort of brokenness, it's a good thing. Because with that sort of attitude, God can do something. I'm reading in between the lines, kind of filling in the rest of Jesus' teaching. But that's a beginning for God and you. For you to be broken. For you to be humble. Because that's when He can really start to work on you. And yes, the reward is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. It's a little bit easier to accept that one, isn't it? How many of you have gone to a funeral or your friend has lost someone? Or nowadays, a lot of times it's just you lose a fur baby. Right? Yeah, fur babies are big. And you just receive comfort from so many people. And that one I can understand, but look at this next one. Does this fit with today's culture, by the way? Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. See, I thought you had to go and get, according to what I'm taught by commercials and by TV and by the news and by 90% of what's we're exposed to. I mean, you don't get anything unless you go for it, right? Unless you're out there just grabbing whatever you can, right? Isn't that our culture? But here's Jesus saying, well, if you're meek, you're going to get it all. You get the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for you will be filled. They will be filled. Really? I don't find too many people hungering for righteousness nowadays. Do you? Is that what you're seeing on TV? Is that what you're reading in the news? Is that what you see on Facebook? No, if anything, it's unrighteousness that's the big brouhaha today. It's living contrary to what the Bible teaches. That's what the world teaches. But here's Jesus, and He's teaching, no, hunger for righteousness, and you're going to be filled. Verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Oh, we need a few peacemakers in our world today, don't we? Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Really, let's think about these last three verses. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Wow. I still am amazed after all these years of studying Scripture. I've been a Christian since I was 12. And I've been studying the Bible as far as college level work since forever. It still amazes me when you take and you look at Scripture, and Jesus didn't pull any punches. Did you realize how often he talked about how costly the Christian life is? That you can't enter into it just blithely, you can't just kind of coast along in the Christian life. Not only is it costly, not only do you have to make some big choices, but he also says crazy, stupid sort of things. You know, if you're going to be the leader of a cult, if you're going to be the leader of something that's going to change culture, you don't tell people, oh, by the way, if you follow me, you're probably going to die. Oh, by the way, if you follow me, people are really going to hate you for no other reason than you're a Christian. One of the best things I loved about last night with Henry Chuck, you know, I still laugh, just the fact he talks about he's South Korea because he grew up in the South. But he also talks about he was supposed to be a doctor or play the cello or stuff like that, but he was born here, so he's dumb. So if he had been born in Korea, he would have been smart. You know, I love that, and you know, just his sense of humor. But at the end of his show, as he was talking a little bit more about himself, he very boldly said, "I'm a comedian who happens to be Christian." Didn't have any problem at all. Of course, we are in Plateau, the Bible Belt. We didn't get a lot of applause in that one. But he did just, you know, boldly, in front of a lot of people, said, "I'm a comedian who happens to be Christian." Now, this guy's been on TV, he's been all over. I'm thinking nowadays, there's not too many people who would take that kind of... He also said some, you know, very strange things, like, "Men, put your pants on, you know, start to be men again." You know, that sort of thing. Those sort of messages are just contrary to what the world's saying nowadays, isn't it? And Jesus says, right here, if you're going to follow me, if you're going to be a follower of the Son of God, if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, the Christ, you know, it's not a last name, by the way, it's a title. He is the Messiah. If you're going to be a follower of him, then you are blessed, but guess what? You're going to be insulted, you're going to be persecuted, and people are going to say all kinds of false things about you. And it's nothing new. If you think it's new nowadays, some of the things that people in the world are saying about Christians, particularly in the United States, 2,000 years ago, when this Christianity thing was fairly new, and particularly in Nero's day, when the pages of the New Testament are being written, you know what they used to say about Christians? We're cannibals. Yeah, we're cannibals because we eat the body and the blood. They even talked about we sacrificed infants in our meetings and we ate babies because we're eating flesh and we're drinking blood. So they talk about false news. Now that's false news. You take a little bit that's truth. Yes, we have the Lord's Supper. We talk about drinking the blood and eating the flesh of Jesus. But it's not literally true. 2,000 years it's been going on. I don't see any time that's going to change. Do you? No. So with this in mind, you know, what does it mean to be blessed? When we say, I'm blessed, well, I don't know about you. I don't really have a whole lot of people that are insulting me. Yeah, sometimes. It depends on what you write in your comment card. I don't have a huge amount of persecution. Not the really bad stuff. I think, you know, I don't expect that when I leave here, I'm going to be hauled out and stuck on a cross. I'm not seeing that sort of persecution. But if that were to happen, could I say, I'm blessed? I am blessed. I've been married 40 plus years to a wonderful family. Yeah. I am blessed. But the sort of blessings that Jesus is talking about, I have been low in spirit. But at the time I was low in spirit, I didn't feel like I was inheriting the kingdom of God. When I'm up in spirit, I feel like that. Well, with this in mind, let's look at two people. Now, I'm not actually going to, we will go to John chapter 3, so you can go ahead and turn to John chapter 3. We're going to read a portion of that in just a few minutes. We're going to look at two people, John chapter 3 and John chapter 4, and I'm just going to give you a synopsis of the story, but there's two people, and you're going to see Nicodemus versus nameless. Now, Nicodemus, let's play along a little bit today. Nicodemus was Pharisee. Yeah, Nicodemus was a Pharisee. He was one of the leaders of the Pharisees. He's actually part of the Sanhedrin. And he's kind of an interesting character. Here's this guy who's curious about Jesus. He's curious about Jesus, but he's a Pharisee, and that by itself means he's in conflict with Jesus. Because the Pharisees is a party, as a group, and they're a religious party. It's not necessarily a political party, although they were, but primarily it's a religious party. And they're pretty conservative. As a matter of fact, they thought they were far more righteous than everybody else because they're all a bunch of sinners, and they're looking at the culture around them, and they're coming to the conclusion that, man, these people just don't live according to the Bible. You know, it's that sort of group. And here's Nicodemus. They don't like, the Pharisees do not like Jesus because he's really rocking the boat. And he's making them look, this is the worst thing, he's making them look bad. And whatever you do, don't tarnish my image. You know, let me tarnish my image, but I'm going to cover it up. But that's the Pharisees. So Nicodemus, in chapter 3 of John, comes to Jesus, and when does he come to him? Night. He comes to Jesus at night, and they have a little conversation. And Jesus doesn't pull any punches. He lays it out to Nicodemus. If you remember, one of the things that he says to Nicodemus is, you're a teacher of Israel and you don't know these basic things. Yeah, you know, in other words, he's saying, what's wrong with you? You're supposed to be leading these people and you don't even know the basics. Teaches them some pretty phenomenal stuff. Now just hold on to this while we talk about nameless. She's in chapter 4. But here's one of the most righteous people that you can identify in New Testament times. And he comes to Jesus in the middle of the night because he doesn't want anybody, and he can't have any of his friends find out he's meeting Jesus. You don't see too much of Nicodemus until the end of Jesus' ministry. And you see him at the end of Jesus' ministry. What's he do there? He helps bury. He takes another Pharisee named Joseph from Arimathea, and the two of them go and they get Jesus' body off the cross, and they haul it off to Joseph's tomb, and they help bury Jesus in that tomb. I just want you to know, because of this little conversation in John chapter 3, I think that's why here's Nicodemus 3 years later doing something that's pretty bold. I mean, talk about bold, talk about risking your life, talk about fulfilling Matthew chapter 5, verses 11 and 12. I mean, he risked everything. He risked his reputation. He risked his standing in the community.